in today's video, we want to discuss something very important because there's a lot of confusion about whether or not eggs are healthy for you and whether you should eat them at all. And if so, whether you should be eating 1 a day, 2 a day, 3 a day, or just a few per week. Okay. There doesn't seem to be a very consistent answer when you look on social media. A lot of people are confused. And as a result of that, it can be hard to know the actual truth and whether or not eggs should be a part of your diet. So we did a lot of searching before we created this to try and figure out what are people on the internet saying and what are they asking. And people are asking things like, I've recently gotten back into hitting the gym, and one of my favorite go-to breakfasts is scrambled eggs and toast. However, I have read online that eating eggs for you every day can be bad, especially if you have 2 a day. Is there a limit to how many eggs you should be eating per day? Okay. So that's a perfectly reasonable question. In addition to that, there's people asking questions like, seems like there's a lot of schools of thought here about eggs. I see a lot of people advocating that eggs are inherently unhealthy and that you should consume them in a minimum quantity. On the other side, you see that there's a lot of carnivore and ketogenic individuals who are suggesting that eggs are one of the healthiest breakfasts that you can eat, and you should actually increase your intake of them. And you know what? Don't worry about how much cholesterol is in them. So what's the truth? Is it 1 egg? Is it 2 eggs? Is it 3 eggs? Should I have them in the morning? Should I not have them in the morning? Should I eat them at all? Right? I get it. It's confusing. And trust me, I had to study eggs inside and out for many hours and many days and many months in order to really understand what the research says. So that's what I want to present to you today. It's not just a question of what my opinion is. Okay. My opinion is irrelevant. Science doesn't care what I think. I'm here to tell you the actual truth that comes from the scientific research. Now, part of the reason that eggs are so popular is because they're actually a relatively inexpensive source of animal protein. They're also a good source of B vitamins, and they also contain a significant amount of irons. But they're also high in cholesterol, and they're high in saturated fat. And the research demonstrates that foods that contain saturated fat and foods that contain cholesterol are actually causative in increasing your LDL cholesterol, which is the quote unquote bad cholesterol. So we're going to get into detail about that. Now, Americans have actually been consuming fewer eggs since the 1970s, when the research first showed that cholesterol levels in your blood were linked with the development of cardiovascular disease, and that eggs could contribute to an increase in your LDL cholesterol. So as a result of this, there's a lot of people who are recommending that people with diabetes don't eat carbohydrate-rich foods, because if you eat carbohydrate-rich foods, then that's going to spike your blood glucose. And one of the things that you can do to lower your carbohydrate intake is you can add in other foods that are both protein-rich and fat-rich. So eggs are the perfect food to put in your diet if you're trying to eat a low carbohydrate diet, especially as a lot of these ketogenic and carnivore advocates are telling you how to do it. Okay. So the thing is that data from controlled studies and large-scale epidemiological studies have actually failed to find a clear association between dietary cholesterol intake and blood cholesterol levels. So in the 70s, we had one piece of information. Back in the 90s, the recommendations were modified. They were then modified again. They were then modified again. So in today's world, it's not very clear as to whether or not eggs contribute to increased cholesterol, and whether cholesterol increases to cardiovascular disease risk, and whether that has any implications in diabetes at all. So the simple way to think about it is this. The confusion about whether eggs are good for you stems mainly from the confusion about whether cholesterol itself is good for you, because you can't really separate the two of them. Okay. It's hard to decouple them. And that's one of the reasons why so many people are confused. Okay. But the question that we're trying to answer is actually more specific than, are eggs good for me? It's not that simple. The question that we are trying to answer is even more in depth, which is, are eggs good for you if you're living with any form of diabetes? That's the question. And in order to answer that question, we got to dive deep into the research, because that's where you're going to find the actual truth, because there's actually a very clear difference between what happens to people who eat eggs, who are living with diabetes, and who are not living with diabetes. And we're going to see exactly what that is. Now, in essence, there's two parts of an egg which are distinctly different from one another. The first is the yolk, and the second is the white. In order to understand the egg a little bit more deeply, let's understand the nutritional difference between both of those parts. Now, the yolk itself is a storehouse of cholesterol and saturated fat, and it also contains some fat-soluble vitamins and minerals. One egg yolk contains 55 calories, which is 4.5 grams of total fat, 1.6 grams of saturated fat, 184 milligrams of cholesterol, and small amounts of vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin B6, and vitamin B12. Okay. The egg white is mainly a storehouse of protein. Okay. Now, one egg white contains 17 calories, which is not a lot. It contains 0 grams of total fat, 0 grams of saturated fat, 0 milligrams of cholesterol, 0 grams of carbohydrate, and about 4 grams of protein. So an egg white is effectively a pure protein versus the yolk, which is a little bit more diverse in its nutrient supply. One thing to add to that is that the egg white itself contains no appreciable vitamins or minerals, and can effectively just be thought of as effectively a pure protein. Now, multiple studies involving more than 80,000 people found that eating more than 6 eggs per week significantly increases the risk of cardiovascular disease in people living with diabetes. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty details. This is where the super nerds are going to love it. Okay. If you're a super nerd or you're somebody who really likes to dive into the research, then you're going to love this section. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to get research heavy. So put on your research hat. Okay. The first paper was published in 1999. This is the first paper that we're going to talk about, published in 1999. And it analyzed the health outcomes of more than 37,000 men aged 40 to 75 years and more than 80,000 women aged 34 to 59. Okay. The researchers found that after adjusting for age and smoking and other lifestyle factors that contribute to coronary heart disease, they found no evidence of a significant association between egg consumption and the risk of coronary heart disease or stroke in either men or women. So in other words, eating 6 or more eggs per week has 0 measurable effect on an increased risk of coronary heart disease. Okay. And these are the types of studies that the general public cites and says, hey, look, eggs are good for you. I can prove it because that paper just demonstrated that there's no negative effect from eating up to 6 eggs per week. Okay. However, we're going to get a little deeper because the question that we're answering is, are eggs smart or dangerous for people living with diabetes? So this paper did a subgroup analysis on people specifically living with diabetes, and they found something very different. They found that men who ate 6 or more eggs per week doubled their risk of developing coronary heart disease. And women who ate more than 6 eggs per week increased their risk for coronary heart disease by 49%. Now that's interesting because it shows that when you've already been diagnosed with some form of diabetes, eggs go from being potentially harmless to actually quite harmful. It's very interesting. The second paper that I want to talk about was published in 2007. And this paper, just like that previous study that we looked at from 1999, in this paper, the researchers found that eating more than 6 eggs per week does not increase the risk of stroke in people who had no pre-existing conditions at the beginning of the study. So we see the same thing between the first 2 studies. But those that are living with pre-existing diabetes at baseline, eating 6 or more eggs per week doubled the risk of coronary artery disease. Now, these results came from studying 9,734 adults, 349 of them who were living with diabetes. So it's the same pattern that we saw with the previous study. If you don't have diabetes, then there doesn't seem to be too much of a risk. But if you are living with diabetes, then your risk for developing coronary artery disease and coronary heart disease goes up significantly with an increasing amount of egg consumption. So think about it this way. 2 studies performed by different research groups in separate subjects, 8 years apart from each other, okay, discovered not only the same trend, but found that people with diabetes increased their risk by the same magnitude when eating 6 eggs per week. That's important, okay? This is when repeatability happens. This is a very strong signal that the trend is likely to be real, because in order for science to be credible, science has to be repeatable. Otherwise, it lacks scientific rigor. Now, in 2008, the Physicians' Health Study found that the consumption of more than 1 egg per day resulted in a 23% increase in the risk of what's known as all-cause mortality, which is premature death from any cause. In this study, information on egg consumption was self-reported by the individuals, like I talked about earlier. And they used a simple, abbreviated, semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire, blah, blah, blah. It's a food frequency questionnaire that asks them to report how often, on average, they've been eating eggs during the past year. Their responses include, number 1, rarely or never. Number 2, between 1 and 3 a month. Number 3, about 1 a week. Number 4, 2 to 4 a week. Number 5, 5 to 6 a week. Or number 6, daily. Okay. And then finally, people can respond with, I eat more than 2 eggs per day. Now, this information was obtained at baseline and then at 24, 48, 72, 96, and 120 months after they were randomized into one of their groups. Now, this study analyzed more than 21,000 participants over the course of 20 years. And they found that egg consumption of about 6 eggs per week was not associated with the risk of all-cause mortality, which follows from the previous studies. But the consumption of 7 or more eggs was associated with a 23% increased risk of death after controlling for many confounders. Okay. This is interesting because the data from the Nurses' Health Study indicates that eating more than 7 eggs per week doubled the risk of all-cause mortality in male subjects, and that eating more than 7 eggs per week increased the risk of heart disease in males living with diabetes. Now, these are really important studies because all-cause mortality is the ultimate risk factor when evaluating the effect of any variable in your lifestyle. If your risk for all-cause mortality increases due to any single variable, it means that your risk for premature death increases significantly, and you should pay attention to that. Hey, this video was just a snippet of a much more in-depth discussion. Now, we know not everyone has the time to watch an hour-long video, so I hope that this highlight taught you something helpful. Now, if you're interested in watching the full-length deep dive, then I highly recommend that you check it out because there's a ton more to learn on the subject, and this is just hitting the tip of the iceberg. Just click on the link on the screen to check out the full-length episode. And if you're already going, whoa, that's a lot to digest, I just want to live a healthy life and call it a day, then don't worry because we have expert coaches who can help get you true, long-lasting health that can actually be very simple and be your accountability coach and give you a personalized roadmap to lower your blood sugar, to lose weight, and to get off medication for good. Now, the science behind health is overly complicated, unfortunately, but getting healthy doesn't have to be. Visit masteringdiabetes.org/start. Answer some questions about yourself and schedule a free consultation to talk with somebody on our team who's going to show you exactly how we've transformed the lives of thousands of people using the Mastering Diabetes method. It's important you answer all of the questions to the best of your ability because we want to be able to get you the right coach. We have a limited number of spots available, and that's why it's imperative to find a good fit. Again, visit masteringdiabetes.org/start to schedule a free zero-commitment discovery call and start taking control of your health today.